Assalamu alaikum. It's good to be back. I hope you miss me as much as I missed you. It's a good idea every now and then to take a step back from whatever you're doing, reassess what you're doing, how you're doing it, for what reasons you're doing what you're doing, and see where you can improve. And alhamdulillah, I feel like the period of absence from my YouTube channel allowed me to do exactly this. So I'm really optimistic about the future of practical Islamic finance, and I thank all of you who stayed subscribed during my period of absence. And now, enough with that mushy talk, let's get right into the topic of today, which is Ethereum. You know what's crazy? This picture, it sold for $70 million. That is, the rights to this picture sold for that much. This picture represents a lot of things. Most importantly, it represents what I and many others think is going to be the future of how most creative works are going to be monetized. The picture you saw is an example of what is called an NFT, or a non-fungible token. Now, you may be wondering, what does non-fungible mean? Fungible simply means that one is just as good as the other. Like a dollar, for instance. If I had a dollar and I told you, hey, would you exchange the dollar that you have with the dollar I have? Chances are, assuming the dollars are in reasonable condition, you're going to be like, yeah, sure, why not? They're the same. They're completely fungible. Non-fungible means it's unique and cannot be replaced with another. The ultimate example of a non-fungible being is a human being. Every human is completely unique. Even twins, or theoretically clones, they are completely unique. And the reason why this is because they have different souls. At least this is what us Muslims believe. I've sometimes heard atheists refer to humans as meat machines, which I think is ridiculous, because they're implying that basically humans are just material and they don't have souls. But then if you ask them, hey, are you okay with me replacing your baby at birth with an exact clone? They say no, they're not okay with that, because they know instinctively that these two are not the same. Even though genetically they're exact copies, they're not the same because they have different souls. Meanwhile, if you ask them at checkout, would you replace this coffee machine that you picked out with an exact replica, they'd have no problem with that. So I've digressed quite a bit at this point. My point is that new coffee machines of the same make and model are fungible. Human beings, on the other hand, are not. So if you take anything away from my videos, is that human beings are not fungible because they are unique. Now, going back to non-fungible tokens are basically unique, one-of-a-kind digital assets. What's advantageous about NFTs is that there's something that creators can turn on that will allow the creator to collect a percentage every time their work is sold or changes hands. So the creator can earn money on their creative work in perpetuity, potentially, with very little effort on their end. And some have asked me about my opinion on NFTs and whether I think they are halal or not. Generally speaking, I'm going to make the following observation, which I think is about time to be said, which is that a lot of commentators in Islamic finance have perpetuated this idea that has no basis in the Quran or Sunnah, which is that the permissibility, the halal nature of a transaction is tied to whether the subject of the transaction exists in physical form. And I have to say, this is one of the biggest misconceptions in Islamic finance and errors that I think is quite commonplace. There's no connection. In my 10 years studying Islamic finance, I could find no connection between an item existing in physical form and being permissible to transact in. I think a much more prudent way of approaching the question is asking oneself, is the subject of sale useful or not? Is there any utility to the subject of sale? And what is that utility? Is it harmful in any way? that is where the halal and haram border lies, not in whether or not the subject of sale exists in physical form. And the reason I said all that is to say, there's no problem if you're buying or selling a digital asset. It doesn't have to exist in physical form. Just to drive this point home, take as an example patents. So if you hold a patent to a technology, you can sell the right to use that technology to someone else. And yet that right doesn't have any physical form. And yet it's completely halal for you to do so. So just because NFTs relate to digital assets doesn't make it haram. There has to be something else that makes it haram, in my opinion. So for example, if the image is of something that is haram, then that's something that I would find haram to transact in. But just because it's digital and there's no physical presence to the subject of sale, just because that's the case, I don't think you can say that it is haram to transact in those items. Wallahu alam. Now, why am I talking about NFTs? Well, most NFTs are built on the Ethereum blockchain. The Ethereum blockchain was built to enable functionality that is tough to get from the Bitcoin blockchain. So whereas the Bitcoin blockchain was designed to store and transmit value, the Ethereum blockchain is designed to do things like store information on NFTs and host decentralized applications, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. Ethereum was founded in 2013, so 4 years after Bitcoin launched, and it actually launched in 2015. And unlike Bitcoin, which has an anonymous founder, Satoshi Nakamoto, Ethereum has a very unanonymous founder, who is Vitalik Buterin. The initial motivation for Vitalik to create Ethereum is that he was playing a game and the creators of the game made a change to that game which he didn't like.
And it has this funny story, I don't know if it's real or not, but you first saw the power of decentralized, or at least the demand for decentralized applications when your World of Warcraft character had his rules changed on him by a Blizzard update. And that annoyed you so much that you had to go out and build something like Ethereum. So in theory, you could even build a massively multiplayer game on top of Ethereum, where everyone can have the rules verified, right?
Well, the story's true, though. The fact that them nerfing Siphon Life and leading to me crying myself to sleep is what led directly to Ethereum is a bit exaggerated.
Vitalik decided to create Ethereum in the hopes of eventually creating applications, such as the game that he was playing, that didn't have central control. So in the case of World of Warcraft, the game that Vitalik was playing, that game is controlled by Blizzard, the company that created the game. But Vitalik wanted to create games and other applications where there wasn't one entity that had control over it, and therefore couldn't make rash decisions without wide consensus. And there are a lot of other advantages to decentralized control. So imagine an Uber app where you didn't need Uber the company. So the transaction was directly between the rider and the driver. This means that eliminating the middleman means there is more money left over for both the rider and the driver. After all, Uber takes a cut from both. But for a decentralized application to truly be decentralized, it has to have a decentralized infrastructure. Ethereum is one attempt to build the infrastructure that you need to build decentralized applications on. Now, to interact with these decentralized applications that are built on Ethereum, you need Ethereum's native currency, which is Ether. And whenever you hear the price of Ethereum quoted, basically what's being quoted is the price of Ether, the native token of Ethereum. And decentralized applications are not just cool in theory, there are actually decentralized applications that have been built and are being built and developed at an accelerating pace. DappRadar is one site where you can explore many of the decentralized applications, or dApps for short, that have already been built on Ethereum and other protocols. One of the major themes that have emerged in dApp development are those related to decentralized finance, or DeFi for short. These are applications that attempt to replicate various banking features in a decentralized way. Now, I've been asked a lot about the permissibility of certain applications, which I hope to cover, inshallah, in future episodes. In a nutshell, I think a good rule of thumb is that if the centralized version of that application is haram to use, then the decentralized version of the application is haram to use as well. So that's Ethereum in a nutshell. To me, it's rather obvious that the future will be a lot more decentralized than it is today. Whether that is a bad or good thing depends on what we build. So for example, Twitter was Donald Trump's main propaganda tool that eventually led some people to storm the Capitol building in the United States and also threatened to end one of the longest lasting democratic experiences in history. Now, because Twitter is a centralized organization, they were able to shut down Trump's account and things slowly cooled down. With a decentralized Twitter, for example, it would be much harder to ban a specific user. The flip side to this is that authoritarian regimes that would like to turn off the centralized version of Twitter have a much easier time doing so than they would had Twitter been decentralized with no one neck to choke, basically. Ultimately, I think that this technology is inevitable. We just have to make sure that it ends up enhancing our lives rather than detracting from it. Now, let's talk about why you probably came here, which is what I think about Ethereum tokens and whether I think they are a good investment or not. Now, to answer the question of whether Ethereum tokens are a good investment or not, we have to understand the dynamics of supply and demand for Ethereum tokens. Let's start with supply. The biggest argument against Ethereum is its lack of a stable monetary policy. With Bitcoin, for example, there are only 21 million coins that will ever come into existence. If you want to figure out how many Bitcoins exist currently in circulation, it's pretty straightforward to figure out exactly with a high degree of accuracy how many Bitcoins there are. There isn't that type of clarity with Ethereum. The monetary policy for Ethereum has changed multiple times despite being a lot younger than Bitcoin. I will say though that the current monetary policy for Ethereum is designed for very low percentages of inflation, like less than 3% or even less than 2% annually. However, how long this monetary policy persists is anyone's guess basically, because it has changed many times before. This dynamism in Ethereum's monetary policy is partly due to the fact that decision-making for Ethereum is more concentrated than it is for Bitcoin. Now let's talk about demand for Ethereum. So unlike Bitcoin, where demand is motivated by the desire to preserve and transmit wealth, and of course, speculation to a large degree, the demand for Ethereum is motivated, in addition to speculation, by the following. Number one, the utility of the tokens to interact with decentralized applications, which are made up largely of smart contracts, or to transact in NFTs. Most of the time, you're going to need an Ethereum token or tokens to do that. The second source of demand for Ethereum is staking. So I've talked about staking in a previous video, and it's basically where you lock up a certain number of tokens for a period of time and you earn rewards for doing that, and these rewards are gifted to you by the protocol because your staking of your coins is actually increasing the accuracy and security of the blockchain network. Now, if Ethereum continues to be the dominant platform on which decentralized applications are built, and I think it probably will be, at least in the near term, and the rate of building and using decentralized applications continues to rise, then I think it's safe to say that Ethereum tokens will continue to appreciate in price as well. Long term, however, I think there are some serious risks for Ethereum. The first risk I see is that of competition. So competing protocols like Polkadot and Cardano attempt to do things that are similar to Ethereum, and I think we're probably too early in the game to call a winner. The second risk for Ethereum is crashes and hacks. So Ethereum is more complicated than Bitcoin, and with complexity comes more opportunities for things to break and for hacks to happen. And in fact, in the history of Ethereum, there have been hacks. For example, the DAO event, where close to $50 million were stolen by a hacker. Now, since then, there have been some fixes made, but if it happened in the past, there is a probability that it happens in the future as well. And the third risk I see with Ethereum is the concentration of decision making. Now, it's not as concentrated as a traditional organization is, but it's not as decentralized as Bitcoin is either. This makes it more probable that errors in judgment occur that may set the protocol back substantially. So what I'm saying is that this is not a set it and forget it type of investment. I am certainly bullish on the prospects of decentralization and decentralized applications and a lot of the things that are built on Ethereum. I think they can potentially have as big an impact on humanity as the internet itself. So it made sense for me, at least, to invest some money into Ethereum, but it's money that I understand is being invested in a high risk and high reward investment. This is not financial advice. Make sure you do your own due diligence before you make any investment decisions. In case you're wondering, I bought my Ethereum tokens back in mid-March when the price was close to 1800. And like I said, for me, this is not a set it and forget it type of investment. I think one should keep a close eye on developments in the space if they are invested in something like Ethereum, because the crypto world is developing very fast and Elon Musk still has a Twitter account, so you have to be really diligent about this space. I hope you found this video beneficial. I'd really appreciate a welcome back like, subscribe to see how long my beard will eventually become, how long I'll let it become. Until next time, make sure to take care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum and peace be upon you all.